Every town has its legends, stories whispered through the years, meant to frighten children and keep them in line. But what if one of those stories was real? Tonight, we uncover the tale of the Bagman, a figure born of fear, shadow, and despair. A legend that refuses to fade, haunting those who dare to question it. In the 17th century, in a desolate European village, the winters were brutal and survival was uncertain. Life was harsh, and the villagers relied on each other for everything. But not Ivan Grekov. Ivan was an outcast, a solitary figure who lived in a crumbling hut on the edge of the forest. His presence unnerved the villagers. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were cryptic and unsettling. Always by his side was an old, tattered sack that he dragged behind him wherever he went. Rumors spread about Ivan's sack. Some said it was filled with stolen goods. Others believed it held the remains of animals, or worse. But no one dared confront him, at least not at first. One cruel winter, the village was struck by tragedy. 3 children vanished without a trace. The parents were inconsolable, the village gripped by fear. Whispers filled the air. "It's Ivan. It has to be him." Desperate and enraged, the villagers marched to Ivan's hut. They found him sitting by a weak fire, the sack at his feet. When they demanded answers, he simply looked at them and said, "I only take what no one else cherishes." His words sealed his fate. The villagers dragged him deep into the forest, tied him to a tree, and left him to perish in the bitter cold. As the wind howled around him, Ivan uttered a curse that chilled them to their cores. "I will return for what you hold dear. My sack will never be empty." And so, Ivan Grekov died alone in the woods, but the legend of the Bagman had just begun. Centuries passed, but Ivan's curse lingered. The village faded into history, yet the story of the Bagman persisted, whispered in hushed tones from one generation to the next. In the modern town of Ravens Hollow, the legend was still alive. Parents warned their children to never wander the woods at night. The Bagman, they said, was still out there, dragging his sack, searching for the forgotten and the lost. 12-year-old Max, however, didn't believe in legends. He was a curious and rebellious boy who scoffed at ghost stories. "It's just an old tale," he'd say. But the stories intrigued him, and one crisp October night, he decided to prove the Bagman wasn't real. The woods were silent as Max ventured deeper, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The trees loomed overhead, their bare branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. Minutes turned into hours, and the quiet became oppressive. Then Max heard it, a sound faint at first, but unmistakable. A soft, dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across the forest floor. He froze, his heart pounding. The sound grew louder, closer. He swung his flashlight toward the noise, and that's when he saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. Draped over his shoulder was a large, writhing sack. The figure stopped and turned to Max. For a moment, the forest was deathly silent. Then, in a voice dry and rasping like dead leaves, the Bagman spoke. "A curious one, aren't you? What will you offer me to leave unscathed?" Max's flashlight flickered and died. Panic surged through him as he turned and ran, the sound of the sack dragging behind him echoing in his ears. He stumbled over roots and branches, the laughter of the Bagman ringing in the distance. When he finally collapsed on his porch at dawn, he was trembling but alive. Clutched in his hand was something he hadn't noticed before, a small, tattered shoe that wasn't his. Max tried to tell his parents what had happened, but they didn't believe him. "It was just a bad dream," they said. But Max knew better. The only person who believed him was Mrs. Greer, the town's oldest resident. When she heard his story, her face went pale. She handed Max a crumpled note, her hands trembling as she spoke. "Beware the Bagman. He takes what no one else cherishes." Max never ventured into the woods again, but sometimes, late at night, when the wind was just right, he could still hear it, the faint sound of something heavy being dragged through the trees. And so, the legend of the Bagman lives on, a tale of loss, vengeance, and shadows that never truly fade. The next time you find yourself alone in the woods, listen carefully. If you hear the sound of a sack dragging behind you, don't look back, for the Bagman is always searching, and his sack is never empty. Thank you for watching Tales of Chill. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves a good scare. And remember, some legends are more real than we'd like to believe. Until next time, stay safe and stay out of the dark.